Every 2 months, I do a Patreon channel supporter Q&A. If you want to get in on the fun, head to patreon.com/HelloGreedo. For just $1 a month, you can help keep the lights on and be a part of the supporter Q&A. So with that being said, I'm running a fever and nursing a sore throat, so bear with me. I just really hope this shit goes away before Rogue One tomorrow. WKC asks, what is your favorite novel? This is an open question and not based towards sci-fi or Star Wars, but it can be if that is the answer. Also, how was the camping trip? To answer the question for myself, Dune and the entire original series. I've been bouncing this question around in my head for like a week. It's a really tough question, but the novel that continuously pops into my head as my favorite, the piece of fiction that I've read more than any other, the one that has stuck with me all these years, is George Orwell's 1984. Sure, it's a fantastic novel, but it's also a warning for the future. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. A society that appears utopian to many of its characters, but is clearly dystopian to the reader. A state that manufactures history, manufactures reasons for war, manufactures everything for the sake of control, thought crime, surveillance, language policing, the cult of personality. George Orwell is warning the future against the rise of totalitarianism more than he's telling a story. Those who control the present control the past, and those who control the past control the future. I don't know if 1984 is still required reading in high school, but if it's not, it should be. Its impact is huge. When I see things in the news or hear politicians speak, I'm always reminded of the language of newspeak. When I hear the hawks banging the drums of war, I'm always reminded of Oceania's perpetual war and constantly shifting enemies. Whenever I think I know something for sure, or whenever I form an opinion on something, I'm always reminded of 1984. I always check myself and wonder if I formed this opinion on my own, or if I've heard the opinion from somewhere else and adopted it as my own. And to answer the second part of your question, the camping trip was amazing, man. No cell signal, just out there with a tent and a campfire, cooking brats on a stick, cracking open some beers. We also went on a tour of some caverns, which was great. Going camping and being out like that with no distractions, it just makes me a happier person. It's nice to occasionally reset your brain like that. Benjamin Shay, and sorry if I butchered your name, asks, before the release of Battlefront, you would often speak of creating a server so that you and your fans could play together. Since this excited you, why wouldn't you create a Battlefield 1 server? You're right, I planned on making a Hello Greedo server for all of us to play Battlefront on, and when I discovered there wasn't a server browser, well, that was a huge disappointment to say the least. But Battlefield 1 does have a server browser. I don't know why I don't really have a desire to make a server for that game. It's probably just the fact that it's not a Star Wars game. And while I do love Battlefield 1 and think it's an amazing game, the idea of hosting a server doesn't really appeal to me all that much. I can't really explain why, but I think it just boils down to it not being Star Wars. If the Battlefront sequel has a server browser, I might make a server for all of us on the PC. We'll see. Ian Reichs asks, after seeing more trailers for Rogue One, I've begun to wonder if we should have gotten Rogue One before The Force Awakens. What do you think about that? I think the safest bet for Disney was to continue the episodic films. It solidified their ownership of the franchise. It made sense to make Episode 7 before venturing into spin-off areas. If Rogue One came out before The Force Awakens, it would still have been neat, but I think what most people were looking for was a continuation of the main story. At least that's what I was looking for. I think Disney did the right thing. They came out with a bang, something familiar, something that continued the saga, and then experiment a little on the side. The movie critic dude asks, how do you feel about Warner Brothers selecting Jeff Johns to be the Kevin Feige of the DCEU movie starting next year in 2017 with Wonder Woman and Justice League? He's got experience with DC in both writing comics as well as working the recent live-action show. So do you think he'll save the DCEU movies? The only newish DC movie that I've seen is Man of Steel, so I can't really say much about any of the other movies or the state of the DC movie franchise at all. But I think it's a fantastic idea to bring someone on board like Jeff Johns who knows comics inside and out. He's a comic book writer and they're making comic book movies. I think it's just a smart decision. Again, I really don't know too much about the state of the DC universe and how things are going. I do still want to get around to watching Batman vs. Superman and Suicide Squad, but from what my friends have told me, I won't like either. But I have to watch them, right? I can't go off what friends and critics say. I have to form my own opinion before I can praise or shit on something. Mattias Toth asks, what do you think of the idea of making all these spin-off Star Wars movies now? Doesn't it bother you that we already know the end of these movies? I don't really see it that way. Sure, we know what happens in Episode 4 post Rogue One, the same way we knew what would happen after Revenge of the Sith. But we technically don't know the ending of Rogue One, the ending of the individual film. Yeah, we know ultimately the Death Star plans fall into the hands of the rebellion, but we don't really know how. We don't know how the story unfolds. We don't know what happens to our characters. I view Rogue One as its own thing. New characters, new story, new events. We do know what happens in the grand scheme of things when you look at the saga as a whole, but we don't know what happens on the micro level within Rogue One. I hope that makes sense. But it really doesn't bother me at all. I think these spin-off films are a pretty cool idea. Carter asks, who would you like the love story, if any at all, in Episode 8 to focus on? Do you think there needs to be one like there was in Episode 1 through 6? And if you could be any color Skittle, what color Skittle would you be and why? I definitely don't want a love story that's on par with Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. I like the love story, I guess you could call it a love story, between Han and Leia in the original trilogy. It was subtle and relatively realistic. It wasn't overt. It wasn't like, these two characters are in love, this is what people do when they're in love. Han and Leia's relationship didn't feel forced. There was tension, hesitation, and a little mistrust. It felt real. It was a big part of the original trilogy, if you ask me. I love you, I know. And yeah, I think the natural progression of the sequel trilogy would be for two characters to develop a subtle love story. I think the obvious path of this would be for it to be between Finn and Rey. They already seem to care about one another a great deal, and I wouldn't mind seeing that at all. As long as it's subtle, it's fun, it's real. And to answer the second part of your question about Skittles, I'd be yellow, I guess. Captain Black-Eyed asks, if they could have another in-between show like Clone Wars, which was in between Episode 2 and 3, when would you want that to take place? My personal choice is in between 4 and 5. I would actually prefer no in-between shows. I'd rather have a show that takes place in the far distant past. I'd love to have a Star Wars show that isn't really restricted by events that we already know, and can take place in an era that hasn't been explored. There are rules in place when you make a show or movie that takes place in between other movies and shows. Rules that you have to abide by for the sake of continuity. But with a show that takes place like 1,000 years before the prequels, the rulebook could get tossed out the window. Writers would have so much freedom to create a new age of Star Wars. You could literally start an entire new series of saga films that are completely separate from the current saga films. That sounds really neat to me. Just tossing Star Wars in an unexplored territory and seeing what happens. Andrew Siner asks, what is your favorite out-of-film Star Wars content to consume? Video games, books, comics, TV shows, maybe even documentaries for the behind-the-scenes stuff, etc. And of that category, what is your favorite piece of content? I am a Star Wars documentary hound. Documentaries, interviews, behind-the-scenes footage, all of that type of stuff is my favorite out-of-film Star Wars content to consume. Yeah, I play the games, I occasionally read a comic or two, maybe read a book every couple years, but the behind-the-scenes making of documentaries and the interviews with actors and members of the crew, that's where my out-of-movie love lies. I just love to see how things came to be, I love to see how things were made and put together. I love to hear a director's strategy. That stuff endlessly fascinates me. And then I love documentaries that are from an outside perspective looking in, like The People vs. George Lucas. That is one of my all-time favorite documentaries. But I really think my favorite Star Wars documentary is the 2004 Empire of Dreams, the story of the Star Wars trilogy. It is just, I don't know, a basic story of how the franchise came to be. Stories that have been told 1,000 times before, but I still love it. Marton Death asks, I loved your answer to my last question about the presidential election, so I feel I have to follow up with another one. The fact that Donald Trump won came as a surprise for almost everyone. A lot of people all over the world are now genuinely scared for what he might do as president, while some people think his statements throughout the election was just to gain supporters and that he might actually be alright. So my question is, how was your reaction when you found out he had won, and what are your thoughts about Trump as president? And in parentheses, Vader deserved to win, by the way. I agree. Uh-oh. Well, I think it's pretty obvious to say that a lot of what he said on the campaign trail was just to get people fired up. A lot of what he said was to play to the crowd. Many promised policies and promised actions are not even on the table anymore. They've been taken off of his website. He's a showman. That's what he's been doing for years. He knows how to get people on his side. Was a lot of his rhetoric scary? Well, to some people it was, right? What's scary to someone else might not be scary to you. If you were associated with one of the groups that he poked at, I think you might be scared. Occasionally we have to step back and view things as if you were someone else. That might sound a little hippy-dippy, but I think stripping away all the biases and tribalism, all the I am a liberal, I am a conservative nonsense, and try to understand why someone on the other side of the spectrum thinks the way they do. That's pretty basic, right? Seems pretty obvious, right? But some people are just so set in their ways that they can't for a second even contemplate the opposing view. It goes for all sides of the political spectrum. Everyone thinks they're right. I think I'm right. But I try my best to question why I think the way I do. I'm kind of going off of question here a bit. Sorry about that. What I find so gross is all of the politicians who vowed to never support Trump. They're now kissing his feet. It's insane to me. Maybe it's a lack of integrity. I don't know. What is it? Party loyalty? Party loyalty is even more gross. For a year, these people talked about how he was a dangerous candidate. And now that he's our next commander-in-chief, they do a complete 180. And I get it. I get it. They just want to do the best for the country, blah, blah. I get it. But they're just playing the game that so many people voted against in this election. And it's so transparent. Something that's very strange to me is that sometimes people will hear rhetoric that they personally might not agree with, but because it came from their team, they go with it. Anyway, I'm hopeful that he will be a good president. The next 4 years will be very interesting. Oh, and to mention one more thing about campaign rhetoric. What's more scary? Someone who throws rhetoric out there that they actually believe in and that they wear on their sleeve, or someone who knows how to manipulate the hive mind for personal gain and doesn't necessarily believe in what they're saying? I think the latter is far scarier, because it highlights a real glitch in the way we think and analyze. It highlights how easily we can all be led. I have to stress this goes for all sides of the political spectrum. Inevitably, someone will think that I'm just shitting all over one of the tribes. Nope. Tony Zotti, aka Starisma Tone, asks, "You have a very distinctive voice, rich in tone, to my British ear at least. When you are out and about and on your travels, has anyone ever recognized your voice and rumbled you? I understand the reasons for your anonymity, but has it been hard to maintain? The only time I've ever had anyone recognize my voice is when I'm playing a game that has voice chat. And when that happened, that was pretty neat. In the real world, no one has recognized my voice. No one has ever recognized me, period. I wear Hello Greedo shirts occasionally when I'm out and about, and I get comments on them, but I don't know if they're commenting on the shirt because they know the channel, or just because it's a stormtrooper holding a mug of beer. It's probably just the fact that it's a stormtrooper holding some beer. I mean, if they thought it was the channel, they might think it was me and they might approach me. So I think it's just because of a stormtrooper holding beer. But the anonymity hasn't been hard to maintain. I think people get that it's a part of the fun of the channel. Most people that I hear from don't want the mystery to be spoiled, and I think that's pretty awesome. Luke asks, "Hey, did you ever play Battlefront 2? If you did, how much did you enjoy it? Personally, it was my favorite Star Wars game." Oh yeah, I played a lot of Battlefront 2. I really enjoyed it, but I didn't play it nearly as much as I played other first-person shooters. Battlefront 2 came out in 2005? So at that time, I was still deep in Counter-Strike, making maps and whatnot. Battlefield 2 came out around the same time as well. So my friends and I have always had this kind of voting mentality to see which games we play next. And for some reason, Battlefront 2 was never at the top of our list of games we wanted to play together. Which is weird, we're all huge Star Wars fans. But yeah, I played it, I liked it, but I didn't play it nearly as much as other games at the time. Paul Robinson asks, "What's your favorite childhood Star Wars related festive memory?" Mine is getting my AT-AT on Christmas in 1981. Thing was almost as big as me. My favorite Star Wars Christmas memory has to be the Christmas of 1996, when I got my Nintendo 64 and Shadows of the Empire. I sunk a lot of hours into that game that day. I played the first Hoth flying level over and over again. I mean, I got a lot of action figures and Star Wars playsets over the years, but playing Shadows of the Empire on a brand new next level console gaming system was the apex. And the final question comes from Brandon Maltz. Did you see the Clone Wars movie in theater? I know this will probably be a bummer to you, but I've actually never seen the Clone Wars movie. It's always been a movie that I've been curious about, but I just don't have much of a desire to see it. It came out in 2008, and I was in my second year of the Navy at that time, and maybe the movie just passed me by. But maybe one day soon, when I have nothing on my plate, I'll find it on Netflix and give it a watch. It might be fun to make a review of. I usually don't let a Rotten Tomatoes score implant a preconceived notion of what I think I'll think of the movie before I start watching it. But damn, the Clone Wars movie has an 18%, and a score that low usually doesn't lie. So, I think I've decided. I think I'll watch it soon and toss up a review. Stay tuned for that, it should be interesting. Thanks to all the channel supporters for submitting their questions and keeping the lights on. The channel survives because of your support. And now it's time to go dark, stay off social media, not read any comments, and get ready for Rogue One tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Hello Greedo, out.